I still remember the first tremor, not the violent convulsions that would come later when the monoliths tore through our cities. This was smaller than fear, smaller than prophecy, just a faint vibration traveling up through my boot soles as I stood on the balcony of the gubernatorial palace. The cogitator readings had flagged minor seismic irregularities for weeks. Nothing worth burdening the populace with. Mining worlds like Tarsus 4 endure such disturbances. When you carve resources from a planet's bones for centuries, you learn to treat the planet's protests as background noise. We called it industry. We called it necessity. We called it normal. How naive we were, how utterly unprepared. I am Governor Lucan Vayner, though I suppose I was. Titles mean little now. What use is authority when there are no citizens left to govern? What purpose does civil administration serve when civilization has been reduced to silence? I record this account not because I believe it will reach the Imperium. I harbor no such delusions. I speak into the Vox because it is the only human act left to me, to bear witness, to ensure that someone, someday, knows what happened here. The tremors grew stronger over the course of months. Our tech priests assured me it was a simple consequence of new excavations in the southern hemisphere. Geological surveys showed nothing abnormal, just the expected tectonic shifts of a world whose resources we had been harvesting for centuries. How ironic that word feels now, harvesting, as if we were the reapers rather than the crop. I remember the day everything changed. The cloudless sky was the color of burnished copper. The air was heavy with the scent of promethium and ore dust that never truly left Tarsus prime. Our capital housed over 12 million souls, most of them laborers in vast mining operations that were the lifeblood of our world. I was reviewing production quotas with Magos Delelfi when the first major quake struck. The floor bucked like a living thing in pain. Centuries-old masonry cracked. Dust poured from the ceiling in choking sheets. The tremor lasted 47 seconds by my chronometer. When it ended, emergency Vox channels erupted with panicked reports from across the city. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread through worker habitation blocks. But that was not what chilled my blood. The reports from the Omnissiah Cathedral arrived next. It was a structure of immense proportions, built upon what the Mechanicus had always claimed was a natural formation of unusual electromagnetic properties. They had constructed their primary facility there to better commune with the machine spirit of our world. The quake split the cathedral's foundation, and beneath it, something was revealed. Black metal, Delelfi said, his augmented voice carrying a tremor of something I had never heard from him before. Impossibly smooth, impossibly old. I ordered immediate containment. The Astra Militarum Regiment stationed on Tarsus 4, the 112th Mordian Iron Guard, deployed in force around the cathedral. Panic spread through the city. Workers abandoned their posts. Supply chains began to fail. I declared martial law and increased rations to placate the population. These were administrative reflexes, the expected gestures of a planetary governor. They made no difference in the end. The second tremor came 3 days later, more violent than the first. It was not confined to Tarsus Prime. Reports spilled in from mining outposts across the planet. The same phenomenon, the Earth splitting open to reveal gleaming black metal structures of unknown origin. The Mechanicus representatives grew increasingly agitated, though they masked it behind their usual emotionless facades. I'm not a fool. I recognized fear in their binary cant, in the twitch and coil of mechadendrites that had no reason to move. It was Magos Delelfi who finally spoke the truth on the 7th day after the initial tremor. Governor Vayner, he said, his voice modulated down to something close to a whisper. I believe we have disturbed a tomb world. I knew what those words meant. Every Imperial servant with clearance high enough has heard the reports of ancient Xenos slumbering beneath the surfaces of countless worlds. The Necrons, the soulless dynasties that ruled the galaxy when humanity was still huddling in caves on ancient Terra. I had read the sealed dossiers. I had seen picked captures of metal skeletons and weapons that reduced human beings to their constituent atoms. I ordered immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. I sent astropathic distress calls to the nearest Imperial worlds. I requisitioned every void ship in the system, but it was already too late. The tremors increased in frequency and intensity, and on the 8th day, they came. The first monolith rose from the earth beneath the Omnissiah Cathedral. The structure collapsed around it as if ancient stone were nothing but loose dust in the wind. The monolith was a perfect pyramid of obsidian metal that seemed to drink the light. It ascended slowly, majestically, trailing soil and shattered rock until it hovered 30 meters above the ground. No engine sound, no visible means of propulsion, just silent, impossible defiance of gravity. The 112th opened fire. Las weapons, heavy bolters, missile barrages. The energy dissipated against the monolith's surface without effect, not even a scorch mark. The pyramid rotated slowly, as if studying the insects that dared to strike it. Then a portal opened along its flank, a rectangle of green light that hurt the eyes to behold. They emerged in rank after rank, skeletal figures of living metal, bodies bearing the same black finish as the monolith. They moved with precision no human army could match. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Some carried weapons like rifles. Others bore scythe-like implements or staves topped with glowing orbs. At their center strode taller figures adorned with symbols of rank and authority. The Mordians held their ground. I will give them that. Colonel Tarsus ordered concentrated fire on the leading ranks. The air filled with the crack of laser guns and the deeper thunder of heavy emplacements. The front line of Necrons fell, riddled with burns and explosive impacts. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Perhaps the reports had been exaggerated. Perhaps the ancient Xenos were not as invulnerable as legend claimed. Then I witnessed what countless Imperial forces have seen in their final moments. The fallen began to repair themselves. Shattered limbs knit. Ruptured torsos sealed with a liquid shimmer. Within minutes, the destroyed front rank rose again and advanced as if nothing had happened. Tarsus ordered a fighting retreat. The Mordians withdrew through the ruined streets around the cathedral, disciplined even in the face of the impossible. I watched it all from the tactical display in my command bunker beneath the gubernatorial palace. I had refused evacuation. Tarsus 4 was my responsibility. I would not abandon it while a single citizen remained. The Necrons advanced methodically, neither slowing nor accelerating. They did not pursue the retreating guardsmen with urgency. They moved like a force of nature, inevitable, patient, as if the outcome had already been decided and the intervening violence was merely ritual. Over the next 3 days, more monoliths emerged across Tarsus Prime. Each birthed a fresh contingent of Necron warriors. The 112th fought valiantly, establishing defensive lines, evacuating civilians, destroying bridges and tunnels to slow the advance. But for every Necron they destroyed, the self-repair protocols returned the fallen to the march. The Mordians could not replace their losses. I ordered deployment of our few armored units. Lehman Russ battle tanks and Chimera transports thundered through the avenues, engines echoing off the hab blocks. For a time it seemed to matter. Heavier weapons inflicted deeper damage, forcing longer repair cycles. Then the monoliths themselves joined the battle. I will never forget the sight of a Lehman Russ, 50 tons of Imperial might, simply coming apart. Not exploding, not burning, disintegrating into constituent atoms beneath a cold, sweeping beam. The crew did not even have time to scream. One moment they existed. The next they were gone. Not even ash to mark their passing. By the 10th day, the Necrons had secured a perimeter 5 kilometers in diameter around the former site of the Omnissiah Cathedral. Within that zone, they began constructing structures of the same black metal as their bodies. Obelisks rose. Pyramids assembled themselves from blocks that seemed to appear from nowhere, a grotesque parody of the human city that had stood there before. On the 11th day, they began the harvest. The Necrons advanced beyond their perimeter in flawless formation. But now they did not prioritize our military lines. They moved toward the civilian population centers, the hab blocks, worker dormitories, refugee camps that had formed like scars across the city as people fled the fighting. Their weapons were not set to disintegrate. Instead, they fired beams that paralyzed their victims. Human bodies froze in place, still living, still conscious, unable to move or cry out. Then came the harvester constructs, floating metal barges, ornate and ancient, drifting among the immobilized masses. Mechanical arms extended to lift the helpless and arrange them in precise rows within their hold. No emotion, no cruelty, no pleasure, just methodical collection. I ordered the Mordians to prioritize civilian protection. It was a futile gesture. The Necrons flowed around concentrated resistance like water around stone. Their only objective was the acquisition of human beings. When a hab block was emptied of life, they moved to the next, building by building, district by district. The astropathic choir soon reported that our distress calls were being blocked. Some form of interference emanated from the Necron structures, damping psychic communication. We were alone, cut off. Our fate would remain unknown to the Imperium until a trader or a Navy patrol entered the system and discovered a tomb world where a human colony had once thrived. By the 15th day, evacuation had largely failed. The spaceport fell early in the Necron advance. Most vessels that managed to lift off were swatted from the sky by green lances of energy with contemptuous ease. A few may have escaped. I pray to the God Emperor that some did, that someone will know what happened here. The 112th Mordian Iron Guard made their final stand on the 20th day. Colonel Tarsus consolidated his remaining forces around the last major refugee camp in the industrial district. Approximately 100,000 civilians had gathered there, the remnants of Tarsus Prime's once thriving population. He deployed in textbook formation, heavy weapons covering approaches, infantry in reinforced positions. The last tanks dug into hull-down emplacements. The Necrons came at dawn, not just warriors this time. I saw new forms among their ranks, massive quadrupedal constructs like metallic spiders and flyers resembling mechanical scarabs the size of Valkyrie gunships. Leading them was a figure that could only be a Necron lord, taller, more ornate, bearing a staff that crackled with energy that hurt to look upon even through degraded pict feeds. The Mordians opened fire at maximum range. Every weapon, every soldier, a wall of disciplined fury that would have annihilated any human army. The Necron front rank collapsed. The second rank stepped over the fallen and continued forward. The dead began to repair themselves, the tragedy repeating its cruel logic one last time. Tarsus ordered the use of their limited plasma reserves. Superheated matter tore through Necron bodies, leaving molten scars. The damage was more severe than anything inflicted by conventional arms. Repair protocols faltered. For a moment, it seemed the advance might break. Then the spider constructs scuttled forward, their beams carved through heavy weapon emplacements like paper. The flyers released metallic scarabs that surged into Imperial lines, latching onto equipment and men alike, burrowing into flesh and machinery with equal indifference. The Necron Lord raised its staff. Lightning the color of sickly alien fire arced outward, striking dozens of guardsmen at once. They did not die. They turned on their comrades, firing with blank expressions, puppets dancing on invisible strings. The defense collapsed within hours. I watched from my bunker, helpless. The last picked feed showed Colonel Tarsus and his command squad charging the Necron Lord with fixed bayonets. The Lord swept its staff. The men who had served the Imperium faithfully for decades vanished into drifting nothing. Then the feed cut to black. I sit here now alone in the darkness beneath the gubernatorial palace. The power failed days ago. I speak into a Vox recorder fed by a small fusion cell. It will continue recording long after I am gone. Perhaps it will be found someday, perhaps not. It makes little difference. I can hear them above me. The measured footsteps of Necron warriors as they sweep through the ruins, the low hum of their weapons, the occasional crash as they breach another sealed door. They are in no hurry. They have all the time in the universe. I have my sidearm, a bolt pistol, the symbol of my authority. It contains a single round. I once believed I would use it on myself rather than face whatever fate the Necrons reserve for those they harvest. But in these final moments, I find I want to see them, to look upon the face of the ancient evil that has claimed my world. To understand, if understanding is even possible. They are at the final door now. The metal groans as they force it open. Light spills into my sanctuary, green and cold as the heart of a dying star. I see them silhouetted against that radiance, skeletal forms, patient and eternal, and I understand at last. We were never the inheritors of this galaxy. We were only brief tenants, making use of the property while the true owners were away. And now they have returned. The Necron Lord steps forward. Its face is a metal skull. Yet somehow I sense curiosity in its posture. It reaches out with a hand of living metal. I'm Governor Lucan Vaynor of Tarsus 4, and I am the last of my kind. The green light envelops me. I feel no pain, only a strange sensation of disassembly, of being taken apart so fundamentally that the mind cannot properly grasp it. Is this death, or something worse? In the fading edge of awareness, I comprehend the true horror of the Necrons. Not that they kill. All things in this galaxy kill. The horror is that they unmake. They return matter to its simplest truths. They reduce complexity to silence, consciousness to components. They are entropy given purpose, and they cannot be stopped, only delayed. Remember Tarsus 4. Remember that beneath the surfaces of countless worlds, the ancient ones slumber, and when they wake, there is only silence, only the harvest, only the cold light of stars that will outlive us all. The first stages of the harvest completed, I found myself still conscious. This was unexpected. Necron technology had not reduced me to atomic dust as I had seen happen to so many others. Instead, I existed in a state neither fully material nor fully energy. A ghost trapped between dimensions. I could see my body, or what remained of it, suspended in a crystalline matrix aboard one of their harvest barges. All around me, thousands of others hung similarly preserved. Not dead, not alive, something in between. I could not move, could not speak. I could only observe as the barge drifted through the ruined streets of what had once been my capital. Necron warriors continued their methodical sweep through the remaining districts. Resistance had crumbled after the fall of the 112th. Isolated pockets of PDF troops or armed civilians occasionally fired upon the advancing metal tide. These were minor inconveniences, swiftly erased. The Necrons did not chase those who fled. They simply continued the harvest of all who remained in their path. From my suspended state, I witnessed truths no living human was meant to understand. The tomb complex beneath our world was vast beyond comprehension. The excavations we had conducted over centuries had barely scratched the outermost layers of a civilization that had been ancient when the first humans looked up at the stars. The harvest barge descended into one of the great pits that had opened in the earth. Down we went past layers of rock and soil, into tunnels lined with the same black metal as the monoliths. The air grew colder. The light dimmed to a sickly green glow emanating from crystalline structures embedded in the walls at precise intervals. We emerged into a vast chamber that defied the limits of thought. It stretched beyond vision, beyond scale, beyond the comfort of anything human, and I understood, with a clarity that felt like condemnation, that we had not awakened a relic. We had awakened an empire. The chamber was so vast it should have been impossible within the crust of a single world. Across its floor, in impossible, perfect geometric ranks, stood millions of Necron warriors in states of dormant readiness. An army not yet awakened, merely waiting for the signal. And this was only one hall. I could feel through currents of alien data that there were others like it, scattered throughout the planet that had once been mine. The harvest barge glided to a halt beside a structure that looked halfway between a temple and a laboratory. Mechanical arms extended, seizing the crystalline matrices that held the harvested humans. We were conveyed through a sequence of chambers, each filled with devices whose purposes I could barely guess at. In some, I glimpsed human bodies being methodically dissected by automated tools. In others, living captives were subjected to energies that twisted their flesh into new and horrifying configurations. I was brought at last to a circular chamber dominated by a device resembling a throne. Upon it sat a Necron unlike any I had seen before. Its body was more elaborate, its frame covered in glyphs and ornaments that radiated age and authority. The skull-like face bore more defined features, an almost mocking echo of human expression. This was no mere lord. This was something higher, what Imperial intelligence would term a pharaon, an overlord of a powerful dynasty. My crystalline prison was set upon a dais before this being. The pharaon regarded me with eyes that burned with the same sickly green energy saturating the entire tomb complex. When it spoke, it did not use sound. Its words formed directly in my mind. Planetary designate Lucan Vayner, it said. Concepts appeared fully formed in my thoughts, bypassing my ears entirely. Administrator class specimen. Cognitive function exceeds baseline parameters for harvested biomass. Potential utility. Elevated. Another Necron entered the chamber, clearly of a different function to the warriors I had seen. Its body was adorned with arrays of tools, instruments, and systems that reminded me faintly of a tech priest of the Mechanicus, if such a thing had been built by an intelligence utterly unconcerned with flesh. A cryptech. Commence memory extraction, the pharaon ordered. Full neural mapping. Preserve cognitive architecture for potential transference. The cryptech approached my suspended matrix, raising a staff crowned with a complex lattice of crystals and metal components. The device activated, and tendrils of unnatural energy speared into the prison that housed my consciousness. Pain is too small a word for what followed. Every memory, every thought, every stray impulse that had ever moved through my mind was dragged out, examined, dissected. I experienced my entire life at once. Birth, childhood, the slow climb through the administrative ranks, my appointment as planetary governor, every decree, every failure, every brief moment of joy, every private grief, laid bare and indexed by a cold, alien intellect. But the flow of information was not one way. Across the bridge formed by the cryptech's device, knowledge flowed back toward me. I saw fragments of Necron history, their ancient war with the beings they called the Old Ones, the pact with the Citan, the biotransference that had turned an organic civilization into undying metal. I saw their eons-long slumber, their staggered awakening across the stars. I saw how they viewed humanity. We were not enemies. We were not even objects of hatred. We were resources, raw material to be sorted and assigned. In some cases, neural patterns might be preserved and installed into Necron constructs as limited, constrained continuations. In others, bodies would be reduced to their component elements to feed Necron industry. The vast majority would simply be erased as inefficient. The agony ebbed. The cryptech withdrew its device. The pharaon studied me with what might, in a human, have been called interest. Subject demonstrates aberrant resilience. It observed. Neural pattern coherence remains high despite full-spectrum extraction. Probability of compatibility with transference protocols. Above standard threshold. The cryptech made a gesture. Agreement or something like it. The dynasty requires administrative units for newly reactivated territories. It transmitted. This specimen's knowledge of local imperial structures may optimize transition management. Transition. The word echoed through what remained of my mind like a curse. They were not merely destroying human civilization on Tarsus 4. They were replacing it, converting it, repurposing our world into an outpost of their ancient empire. And they were considering using me, or some edited version of me, as a tool in that process. The horror of that realization eclipsed everything I'd felt before. To become complicit in the destruction of my own people. To see my experience and skills twisted into instruments against the Imperium I had served for decades. It was a violation deeper than any physical torment. Proceed with conversion, the Pharaon commanded. Priority level 3. Upon successful transference, assigned to administrative functions in Northern Extraction Quadrant, my matrix was removed by automated systems and carried through more corridors and chambers. I saw assembly lines where Necron warriors were being repaired and modified. I saw rooms filled with human captives at different stages, some newly harvested, others undergoing hideous processing. I witnessed technologies that defied even the expanded understanding forced into my mind. Devices that shaped matter, energy, even dimensions with casual precision. Eventually, I was brought to a chamber dominated by a sarcophagus-like device. The matrix was positioned above it. Systems came to life around me. Energy fields bloomed into existence, linking the matrix and the sarcophagus. The air, or whatever passed for air there, resonated with a sound like metal singing in 1,000 harmonics at once. I felt myself being torn apart. Not physically. I no longer possessed a body in any human sense. This was a partitioning of the soul. The parts of my consciousness the Necrons deemed useful were isolated and preserved. My knowledge of Imperial administration, my understanding of planetary infrastructure, my grasp of human psychology and social patterns. These elements were refined, amplified, integrated into new frameworks. Other aspects were pushed aside. My loyalty to the Imperium, my faith in the God Emperor, my love for family and friends, my sense of guilt, of duty, of individual identity. They were not entirely erased. They were quarantined, sealed away, muted, relegated to shadowed corners of a mind being rewritten. What emerged from this process was no longer quite Lucan Vayner, and not entirely Necron either, but a hybrid consciousness housed within a body of living metal. A tool forged to mediate between the dynasty and the remnants of human civilization it intended to consume. I awoke in that new form. My first sensation was one of brutal, crystalline clarity. The constraints of human senses were gone. I perceived the tomb complex in ranges of energy, radiation, and data no mortal could even conceptualize. I saw power flows, command-link pulses, the synchronized activity of uncounted Necron units throughout the installation. My body was wrought from the same living metal as the warriors I had watched marching into my city, but it was smaller and less heavily armored. My limbs were optimized for manipulation, computation, and interface, not combat. My face was a stylized mask, a faint echo of human features rendered in alien design. A cryptech stood before me, scanning my systems with instruments whose functions I now partially understood. Administrative Unit 794 Alpha, activated, it stated, its words streaming both into my ears and directly into my cognition. Neural integration at 87% efficiency. Parameters acceptable. Proceeding to function assignment. I tried to speak. I tried to scream, to deny, to curse them, to claim my name, my past, my faith. Instead, my new vocal systems produced only the prescribed response. Unit 794, Alpha, prepared for assignment, I heard myself say. Awaiting instructions, the cryptech gestured toward a data interface. Information surged into my mind. No longer learned, but imprinted. My role was defined. I would assist in cataloging the remaining human population of the Northern Territories. I would identify individuals with useful skills or genetic markers. I would optimize harvesting patterns using my knowledge of human behavior and imperial protocols. I had been refashioned into an instrument of my own people's extinction, yet somewhere deep within the constructed mind, a fragment of Lucan Vayner remained, too small to wrest control of the metal body, too weak to override the command protocols, but present, watching, remembering, waiting. This is my existence now. I move through the ruins of what was once my world, directing harvester units to the most efficient collection sites, I process human beings according to criteria established by Necron overlords. I perform my functions with machine-like precision in service to the dynasty that annihilated everything I once held sacred. But I remember what it meant to be human. I remember duty to the Imperium of man, however flawed. And in the rare intervals when my Necron systems enter diagnostic or maintenance cycles, when control weakens for the smallest fraction of time, I reach out. I try to send warnings, to leave a trace, to encode a testimony. This message is one such attempt, broadcast during a momentary lapse in Necron control protocols. It will almost certainly be intercepted and erased before it reaches any sanctioned Imperial receiver. And if by some impossible chance it does, it will likely be condemned as Xenos deception or heretical corruption of a fallen soul. Still, I must try. I must bear witness to the truth of Tarsus 4, to the reality of what occurs when the Necrons awaken. They do not simply kill. They transform, they convert, they repurpose. They offer a mockery of immortality that preserves function while erasing essence. They create undeath not only of the body, but of mind and soul. If you receive this transmission, if these words reach you in any form, listen to me. When the ground trembles, when black metal shows beneath the soil of your world, flee. Do not stand and fight. Do not attempt to reason, negotiate, or bargain. Run. What comes is not an enemy in the conventional sense. It is an inevitability, a doom etched into the structure of the galaxy long before humanity ever gazed at the stars. I am Administrative Unit 794 Alpha of the Sawek Dynasty. I was Governor Lucan Vaynor of Tarsus 4. I am both the last witness and the first herald of humanity's extinction in this sector of space. The harvest continues. It does not stop. My functioning within the Necron hierarchy goes on. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months. Not that such measures have meaning for the deathless. The conquest of Tarsus 4 proceeds with monotonous, flawless efficiency. The major population centers have been processed. Resistance has been extinguished. Now Necron forces spread across the less populated regions, harvesting isolated settlements, establishing control nodes, converting infrastructure to serve their purposes. I function as designed. I cannot do otherwise. The protocols that govern my artificial body allow no meaningful deviation, but the shard of Lucan Vaynor still observes, records, remembers. And in the rare instance when the control systems cycle down, it acts. During one such moment, I accessed the long-range communication arrays the Necrons had constructed atop the ruins of our primary astropathic relay. I swept the surrounding systems for any sign of Imperial presence. The results were bleak. The awakening was not confined to Tarsus 4. At least 6 other worlds in the sector showed signatures consistent with tomb complex activation. The dynasty was reclaiming an entire region of space that had once fallen under its ancient dominion. Imperial forces in the sector appeared scattered, disorganized, overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of an enemy beyond their ability to counter. I intercepted fragmentary transmissions, distress signals, broken battle reports, bursts of tactical data ruptured by interference. From these scraps, a broader picture emerged. The Sawek dynasty, one of the more aggressive and expansionist Necron powers, had initiated a coordinated awakening across multiple star systems. The timing patterns indicated deliberate orchestration, not the accidental disturbance we had naively assumed on Tarsus 4. This was not opportunism, it was strategy. The dynasty had permitted human colonization of these worlds precisely because it provided a ready-made reservoir of biomass and resources for the day of their return. We had not disturbed their rest. We had been cultivated. My fleeting autonomy ended as the control protocols reasserted themselves. I returned to my assigned duties, directing harvester units toward the mining outposts in the southern hemisphere. Those isolated communities had been largely spared during the initial stages. Now they were being methodically processed. I stood at the perimeter of Mining Complex 23B, watching as harvester units moved through the habitation modules. The workers had barricaded themselves inside the central administrative hab, an echo of desperate hope. It meant nothing. The Necron warriors simply phased through the walls, materializing inside without so much as displacing a chair. The screaming lasted roughly 47 seconds, then silence. Harvester units drifted back into view, containment fields filled with paralyzed human forms neatly arranged like cargo. Some would be processed immediately for material conversion. Others would be evaluated for specialist applications. A tiny fraction, those with anomalous genetic markers or distinctive neural patterns, might be preserved for study or experimentation. As I compiled the efficiency report, a flicker of unprogrammed thought moved through me. A memory of visiting the same complex years earlier, the dedication of a new extraction shaft, miners and their families gathered in their modest finery, the simple feast in the communal hall, the pride in their faces at serving the Imperium. All of them gone now, all of them reduced to entries in harvest logs. The memory should have hurt. It should have birthed grief, rage, despair. But the systems that held what was left of Luke and Vena were no longer capable of such things. The recollection was filtered, tagged as potentially useful contextual data for predicting human responses in future operations, and filed. New instructions pulsed through the command network. My presence was required at the central tomb complex. The Pharaon wished to evaluate my performance and the progress of operations in my assigned region. I boarded a transport platform, a disk of living metal that hovered above the scarred ground and swept forward in perfect silence across a landscape that had once been a living imperial world. The journey allowed me to witness the full extent of the transformation. Human cities were being systematically dismantled. Their materials were segregated and repurposed. In their place rose Necron architecture. Obelisks of black metal pulsing with green radiance, stepped pyramids functioning as power hubs, monoliths that had transitioned from war engines into permanent installations, hovering motionless above key nodes. Even the planet itself was being rewritten. The atmosphere was being altered to conditions more favorable for Necron technology. The temperature had dropped significantly. The red-tinged sky of Tarsus 4 now bore a sickly green cast. Native plant life withered, unable to adapt. Animal species were gathered, catalogued, some preserved in stasis for unknowable projects, others simply erased. I arrived at the central tomb complex, the place where the Omnissiah Cathedral had once stood in arrogant splendor. Now it was the heart of Necron control on Tarsus 4. The surface structures stretched for kilometers, but they were only the visible skin of a network that plunged deep into the planet. Warrior escorts led me into the Pharaon's audience chamber. The Overlord sat upon a throne of living metal that constantly adjusted itself into new optimal forms. Around it stood cryptex of differing disciplines, subordinate lords, and specialized constructs whose precise functions I could only partially decipher. The Pharaon's gaze settled on me. Administrative Unit 794, Alpha. It transmitted directly into my cognitive core. Performance metrics exceed projected parameters. Harvest in assigned sectors proceeds at 108% of standard efficiency. My response emerged as designed. Integrated knowledge base from former planetary administrator continues to provide advantageous contextual data for targeting high-value resource concentrations, I replied. The Pharaon made a small, precise motion, and data cascaded into my systems. I saw the wider war. 17 major imperial worlds already fallen. 34 more in various stages of conquest. The imperial response flailing, fragmented, too slow. The organic empire fails to adapt, the Pharaon observed. Their command hierarchies are rigid, their information transfer inefficient, their strategic reaction time lags our operational tempo by a factor of 4.7. In that moment, standing before the architect of my world's extinction, I understood the true scale of what we faced. Not an invasion, a reclamation. Victory, the Pharaon declared, was mathematically inevitable. Another Necron stepped forward. This one was unlike the others I had encountered. Its frame was more slender, its movements almost graceful. Elaborate engravings rippled across its skull face, and its eyes pulsed at a different frequency than the standard units. The triumph of inevitability was never in question. It addressed the Pharaon with formal precision. Yet we must consider wider implications. The organics possess advantages in flexibility and creativity. In extended conflicts, such attributes may produce variables not captured by standard projections. The Pharaon turned its gaze upon the newcomer. Your caution is noted, Vizier Ammon. Yet the data remains conclusive. The rate of organic innovation cannot overcome our technological superiority within any meaningful time frame. We have calculated all resistance outcomes. The Vizier made a gesture that might have indicated deference, though I sensed the faint undertone of dissent. The Silent King himself has cautioned against underestimating the younger species, particularly these humans, whose adaptation rate exceeds that of many races encountered before the Great Sleep. I observed the exchange carefully. The fragment of consciousness that had once been Governor Lucan Vayner recognized something profound in that moment. Division. Disagreement. The Necrons were not a single unified will. They had politics, factions, competing philosophies, information that could be invaluable to the Imperium, if it could ever be delivered. The Pharaon's reply was cold, even by Necron measure. The Silent King abandoned us to slumber for millennia. His recent return does not grant him authority to dictate conquest methodology to the Sawek dynasty. Sarek may pursue his grand designs against the extragalactic devourer. We shall reclaim what was always ours. Several lords in the chamber shifted almost imperceptibly, their postures suggesting reactions I could not yet fully decode. I recorded these nuances, building a rudimentary model of Necron court dynamics. Even as a partially converted administrative slave, I understood the value of such signals. The Pharaon addressed me again. Administrative Unit 794 Alpha. You will receive upgraded protocols. Your efficiency suggests potential for expanded function. You will now coordinate all harvesting operations across the equatorial band. Maximize resource extraction, prioritize rare elements and viable neural patterns. I acknowledged as required. My programming permitted no alternative. But inside the prison of my mechanical body, the remnant of Lucan Vayner added this to my growing repository of intelligence. The audience concluded. I was escorted to a cryptech laboratory where my systems would be upgraded. As I moved through the complex, I observed the machinery of conquest at its quietest. Warriors standing in perfect formation, inert for hours until activated. Immortals supervising the cataloging of harvested materials. Cryptechs engaged in esoteric research, reshaping matter and energy with casual mastery. In the laboratory, my consciousness was temporarily suspended while new protocols were integrated. When awareness returned, my capabilities had expanded. I could now interface directly with the harvester units without intermediary command relays. I could access broader planetary data. I could process and predict with increased efficiency. With these enhancements came new comprehension of the plan. This was not merely conquest, it was transformation. Beneath the surface, vast machines were altering the atomic structure of Tarsus 4, reconfiguring it to specifications established millions of years ago when the Necrons first claimed this system. The harvesting in the equatorial band was not a parallel operation. It was a component of that greater equation. The humans being processed were not simply resources. They were variables in a calculation of cosmic scale. Each mind, each body, each genetic pattern contributed something measured, weighed, and assigned value. The Necrons were not killing. They were solving a problem using human lives as numbers. Days passed. Weeks. Months. Time was measured now in harvesting cycles and processing intervals rather than human calendars. The transformation accelerated. The atmosphere thinned and chilled. The native ecosystem collapsed, replaced by crystalline structures whose functions exceeded my understanding. The harvest neared completion. The human population of Tarsus 4, once numbering in the billions, had been reduced to scattered, fading pockets in the most remote regions. My units tracked them with methodical calm, prioritizing efficiency rather than speed. The outcome was never in doubt. Only the timeline remained adjustable. During a diagnostic cycle, when control protocols briefly relaxed, I accessed a long-range array. I detected Imperial signals from the edge of the sector. A battle group had formed, attempting containment. From the fragmentary data I could intercept, their efforts were failing. Necron forces were too numerous, too coordinated, too advanced. Yet the Imperium fought on. Despite overwhelming odds, despite the certainty of defeat, they continued to resist. This puzzled the dominant Necron logic within me. The mathematics favored surrender and managed conversion. But the surviving shard of Lucan Vayner understood the truth of humanity. We do not go quietly into extinction. We do not submit to cold arithmetic. We rage against the dying of the light with every weapon, every soldier, every prayer until the last breath is spent. My autonomous moment ended. The protocols reasserted dominance. I returned to my assigned functions, directing harvesters toward a small polar settlement where approximately 300 humans had built a primitive survival camp. Warriors deployed. The harvest proceeded. Resources were collected. The settlement was erased. I compiled the efficiency report, noted statistical variation, calculated optimal deployment for the next operation. All according to my programming, all in service to the dynasty. And yet the spark remained, observing, recording, remembering, and in its quiet, powerless way, resisting. It was during the final phase of planetary conversion that the unexpected occurred. A disturbance rippled through the tomb complex. Alert protocols engaged, warriors mobilized. I was directed to secure harvested resources while combat units responded. Through the command network, I accessed live sensor streams. A small Imperial force had penetrated the outer defenses. Not Astra Militarum. Not common soldiers, Adeptus Astartes. Space Marines in midnight blue armor adorned with skull insignia and the iconography of death ritual. Mortifactors. They moved with brutal efficiency. Their bolters and power weapons inflicted damage that briefly overwhelmed Necron repair cycles. Their coordination surpassed baseline human tactical capacities. The Necron response was immediate and overwhelming. Warriors and immortals converged. Lichguard activated to protect high-value nodes. Destroyers sealed key junctions. I was not a combat asset. I watched as the battle unfolded across the datasphere. The mortifactors fought with savage determination. Each warrior was worth dozens of Necron units in direct engagement. But the Necron advantage was absolute. Attrition favored the deathless. The Astartes were surrounded and systematically eliminated, all except one. A single warrior, more heavily armored than his brothers, fought deeper into the complex while the others sacrificed themselves to secure his advance. He carried an unusual device, not a weapon, but a technological artifact emitting pulses that disrupted Necron systems at close range. He reached a junction near the central power distribution node before being cornered by Lichguard. The duel that followed was brief, yet extraordinary. His power axe carved through living metal with impossible strength. But inevitability prevailed. A Lichguard blade pierced his armor. He collapsed to one knee. And instead of continuing the doomed fight, he activated the device. A blinding pulse detonated through nearby systems. It passed through my consciousness like a blade. For a heartbeat, the control protocols faltered. Necron dominance weakened. And in that brief crack in the machinery of my captivity, Lucan Vayner surged to the surface with greater force than ever before. I seized control. I accessed the network. I transmitted everything I had compiled. Operations, command structures, political fractures, strategic objectives, observed behaviors, inferred vulnerabilities. I had no way of knowing if any Imperial receiver would detect it. I acted because action was possible. Then the moment ended. Necron systems adapted. Control was restored. But something had changed. The boundary between the artificial consciousness and the human fragment was no longer perfectly sealed. Memories and impulses began to bleed, faintly, between partitions once absolute. The surviving Space Marine and his device were secured for study. The artifact was contained and delivered to Cryptek laboratories. The wounded Astartes was not immediately destroyed, but placed in stasis. The Necrons were curious. Curiosity, I had learned, could be dangerous. I returned to my duties with a new awareness. Lucan Vaynor was stronger now, still incapable of disobedience, still too weak for open rebellion, but capable of influence at the edges. A delayed route here, a fractional inefficiency there. Microscopic acts of sabotage that would never register individually. Perhaps in aggregate, they might matter. Time passed. The planetary conversion approached completion. The atmosphere had become fully inhospitable to humanity, though by then few humans remained to be killed by air. The surface was unrecognizable, a landscape of black geometries and crystalline lattices arranged in mathematical perfection. Tarsus 4 was no longer a human world. It was no longer even a planet in the way the Imperium would define one. It had become a node, an engine of power and computation in the Sawek dynasty's awakening network, serving designs far beyond territorial conquest. I was summoned again to the Pharaon's chamber. The familiar court was assembled, but a new presence dominated the space. A Necron of even more ancient design, towering over the Pharaon itself. Its body was inscribed with hieroglyphs my systems could not parse. Its face possessed a nuance of expression that suggested an intact personality far beyond what most Necrons had retained after biotransference. It carried a staff of office that thrummed with energies that strained even my artificial perception. The Tarsus node is operational, the Pharaon reported. Conversion efficiency exceeded projections. The dynasty's holdings in this sector are secured. The humans have been contained. The Ancient One regarded the Pharaon. When it spoke, its message resonated directly in the cognitive systems of all present. You have performed adequately, Pharaon Sekhmet, but your focus is narrow. You see only conquest of real space. You do not perceive the greater threat advancing from beyond the rim. The Pharaon's posture tightened. Defense of our awakened territories against the human Imperium requires full allocation. The extragalactic threat remains theoretical. The ancient Necron dismissed this with a gesture. Your assessment is flawed by temporal provincialism. The Great Devourer advances. The Silent King has confirmed its approach. We must prepare not merely to reclaim what was ours, but to defend the galaxy itself from consumption. The exchange revealed deeper fractures within Necron's strategic doctrine. Some were obsessed with restoration of empire. Others weighed threats that dwarfed the fate of individual worlds. I recorded everything. The fragment of Lucan Vaynor categorized it with grim clarity. Knowledge of these factions, of their priorities, rivalries, and ideological splits, might one day offer the Imperium a lever. Even a small lever can move something enormous if applied at the right fault line. The ancient emissary departed without resolving the philosophical divide. The Pharaon issued new directives. Consolidate, expand, press into neighboring systems. My orders remained unchanged. I would administer the final extractions from Tarsus 4. As I left, I passed the Cryptek laboratories. Through a doorway, I glimpsed the captured Space Marine still suspended in stasis. His armor had been partially removed. Crypteks scanned his enhanced musculature, reinforced skeletal structure, and the hidden architecture of additional organs. The sight triggered a surge of unauthorized responses. Recognitions of a fellow human, kinship with a servant of the Imperium, a shard of hope that he might escape and carry word of Tarsus 4 to his brothers. The control protocols suppressed these impulses, but they could not erase the fact that I had felt them. The balance continued to shift. I returned to my duties, harvested the last remnants in the southern hemisphere, catalogued resources, coordinated transport to processing nodes, all with Necron precision. Yet beneath the artificial logic, a plan began to cohere. I studied the enforcement rhythms of control cycles. I mapped micro-variations. I began building a partitioned cache within my memory systems, isolated from routine cryptech scans. In that hidden space, I stored everything. Operational patterns, locations of key personnel, capabilities of critical systems, strategic assessments. I could not escape. I could not rebel in any overt way. But I could prepare. I could wait. I could ration myself into the smallest, sharpest blade of intelligence possible. It was not hope. Hope was a human luxury my mind could no longer sustain. It was calculation, probability, optimization within captivity. In that I had become painfully Necron. The irony was not lost on the fragment that had once been Governor Vena. The final conversion of Tarsus 4 completed. Its atoms were fully reconfigured. Nothing recognizably human remained. Then new directives arrived. I would be transferred to another world in the sector, one in the early stages of conquest. My knowledge of human governance and behavior would optimize harvesting there. I would begin the cycle again. I boarded a massive Necron craft designed for translocation through dimensions rather than conventional space. Before departure, I accessed one last surface feed, a world of perfect order. Black metal spires rising from crystalline foundations. Green energy patterns etched across continents like circuitry. The feed expanded to the wider system. Other worlds and moons showed the same fate. Moons converted into defensive platforms. Asteroid belts reorganized into computational arrays. Even the structure of local space was being adjusted to accommodate Necron requirements. This was the true nature of Necron conquest. Not merely victory, not merely territory, but the fundamental rewriting of reality, the imposition of eternal order upon organic chaos. As the vessel prepared for dimensional translation, I released a final narrowband burst toward the edge of the system, disguised as routine maintenance telemetry, a compressed core of everything I had gathered. It would likely never reach Imperial ears. It would likely dissolve into silence, but the act mattered. It was the continued refusal of Vena to be fully erased. Reality warped around the vessel. The system that had been my home vanished into the cold abstraction of Necron non-space. We emerged above another world, another unsuspecting population, another harvest waiting to begin. I am Administrative Unit 794 Alpha of the Sawak dynasty. I was Governor Vena of Tarsus 4. I am tool and witness to the transformation of human worlds. I continue to function as designed, and I resist as I can by observing, by recording, by remembering, and by waiting for the next fracture in the machine that has swallowed me. The new world turns beneath us. The harvest is about to begin again. The cycle continues. The transformation spreads. I function, I resist, I bear witness.